Hello and welcome back. I am Moss, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Last of Us Episode 2, entitled Infected. So let's get into it. So, first and foremost, what I want to say about Episode 2 is that at this point in time, it seems to be moving at a snail's pace. But it's hard to explain because it seems to be suffering from the same thing that the Rings of Power suffered from, in that at times it moves at a snail's pace, and as far as the plot is concerned, almost nothing happens. But at the same time, the characters are moving so fast, you get no sense of downtime from set piece to set piece. So it makes it feel disjointed in certain ways. Now, that being said, I think that this episode was definitely on par with episode 1. Um, Overall, in the way that they stuck with the plot from the game, I would say that it's pretty close, with exceptions. There are caveats there, and I will go over those later in the spoiler section. Um, but overall, set design was good, acting was good. The I don't want to tell you what's in the episode in case you haven't seen it, but there are zombies in there, obviously. So the zombies that were in there were good. Again, really one of the main issues that I have, other than substance wise, some things that are included in the episode, is the pacing and how discombobulating it is. Now, here we see yet another instance in which the first couple of scenes in the episode are unneeded. It seems to me that this series is going to suffer from some, shall we say, tremendous bloat. Time which they feel like they need to fill for no reason. They could have made this an 8 episode series, or season rather, but they're going with 9. And they feel like they got to fill up every last minute with a lot of stuff that we don't need to tell the story that is intended to being told. And in fact, it goes so far as to give us an outside perspective or backstory, if you will, on the outbreak of the fungal infection. When really, it would really serve the show a lot better if the plot was narrowed down and focused solely on Joel and Ellie and what they're doing. Any outside perspectives are a disservice to the story as a whole, in my opinion. And so, if I'm going to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 based on no factors whatsoever and basically just an arbitrary number, which I'm going to randomly assign, I would probably give it a 7.75 because I didn't like it enough to give it an 8, but I liked it just a teensy bit more than episode 1. And that'll come, I'll tell you why here in a few minutes. And so now let's get into the spoilers section. And the story picks up in Indonesia, where we follow a mycologist and her discovery of the fungal infection, the cordyceps, which have begun to infect human beings through tainted flour and grains. And it's a well done scene. We see her dissecting one of the victims of a bite from one of the infected, and there's some fungal residue inside the wound, and then she pulls out these fungal tendrils out of the victim's mouth, and it just kind of something that I didn't get into in the last episode is the absence of the whole aspect of the spores, and how those can infect people as well. Now, there was a scene at the end of the episode where I guess the writer or the director was talking about the spores, and he felt as though the spores would not have been a realistic method of transmission, as if little tendrils coming out of the mouth is. Now, he says that the wind would shift all these spores around, and there's no possibility for any sort of uninfected human being. Well, here's the thing. One, most fungus is neutralized by UV light, so daylight would probably neutralize a good portion of it, which is why in the game you only run into spores on the inside of buildings in dark, sometimes moist areas. Two, cordyceps, the actual fungus, actually does spread via spores and doesn't have these wide-ranging networks of fungal tendrils that can communicate within miles of each other. So that right off the bat just does not make sense in my mind. Now, that being said, again, the scene itself was well acted. It was okay. Not insight into the epidemic that I felt like I needed as a viewer. And I think it ate up several minutes of runtime that could have been used a little bit more wisely. So next we return to Joel, Tess, and Ellie. Obviously, Joel and Tess still don't trust Ellie in the fact that she has been infected and has not turned yet. Joel thinks that they should just turn around, send her back, and let, I guess it's Fedra, or let whoever is the authority on who lives and who dies, let them take control of it. Because he doesn't believe that she's got any future in this world anyway. Whereas Tess says, well, she hasn't turned yet, so we might as well finish what we came here to do. And Joel ultimately agrees. And so they head out and make their way to a Boston hotel, which is currently flooded. And we get the scene from the game where Ellie is fucking around. She's checking into the hotel, ringing the bell. And not a whole lot happens. I mean, it's pretty much cut and dry. There is a scene where they're walking along the highway and they're just kind of talking about the different types of infected there are out there. And Ellie mentions a type of zombie that shoots spores and infects people. So there's the first mention of spores, thank God. So maybe there are still spores in this. But I don't know. Just the whole and that right there sort of contradicts the whole ethos of how the infection spreads in the first place. Because if the creator wanted to have these long tendrils which get infected, do the spores spread from person to person? Is it only through bodily fluid contact or saliva only, or how does that work? So really, the fact that they're hinting at what in the game is called a bloater, it doesn't make sense within the reality that they've set up and how this infection spreads. And then she mentions an infected with its head split open and can communicate via sonar like bats, or can see in the dark with sonar like bats. And they look at each other and they're like, oh, she might know something. Foreshadowing. But anyway, they make their way through the hotel and they eventually come to a vantage point where they see hundreds and hundreds of infected lying on the ground and shifting as the sunlight passes over them, which kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in how fungi are affected by sunlight, or UV light specifically. This is where we get into Tess talking about miles-long networks of hair-thin fibers that if you trip will notify infected miles away, and they'll all come after you and they'll know where you're at. And then, hop, skip, and a jump to the museum. Nothing in between. We're just there all of a sudden. And this is about half an hour into the episode, so we've got 30 minutes, but you can see nothing's happened, really. Now, this is one scene that I did find particularly good. The tension is there. They do a really good job of setting the atmosphere. You don't know what's going on inside. You see as they come upon it, the fungus is just crawling its way up the doors, but Joel finds that it's bone dry, as they surmise that all the dead inside are in fact dead. And we finally get some peace and quiet as everybody has to remain silent because obviously Joel knows what's going on, Tess knows what's going on. They've seen all these infected. They know that there's a possibility of clickers in here based on a corpse that they found, which was, I don't want to say torn to shreds, but it was more mutilated than just a general bite victim. And this is the best scene in the entire episode, is the clicker scene. You really get that feeling of how you feel in the game when you are in the museum and you're being attacked by the dead. Now, obviously, in the show, there's a lot less. I think in the game, you get attacked by just what seemed like a fuckload of them. Not only clickers, but other infected as well. But in the show, there's only 2 clickers that they have to contend with in what's probably, I don't know, a 5-minute scene. And it's done really well. The clickers behave like they do in the game. They're all spastic and just twisting and turning all over the place, throwing their limbs every which way. And they look phenomenal. And they do a really good job of capturing the tension of making sure that you are absolutely silent when there's a clicker around until you can get the jump on it. And that's basically where the goodness ends. Now, as I said, I mean, the whole episode is not bad other than that part. The whole episode is decent, but that's the only part of the episode that I thought was particularly good. So, from there, we get just a little bit of dialogue, and all of a sudden we are at the next set piece. No travel time whatsoever. You can actually see in the previous scene before they get there, they are what looks to be probably about a mile away as the crow flies. Where Ellie says, "Oh, you can't beat that view." They're like a mile away from where they need to go, and then all of a sudden, there they are. But they find that nobody is there, and they're wondering what's going on. And Tess freaks out and runs inside, ready to go, guns blazing, without even really caring. And then it comes to light that she doesn't care because she got bit and is now infected. And the rest of the episode kind of plays out like Tess's death scene. The only problem is that one of the individuals who's lying in the vestibule of the building that they're in wakes back up, is infected, and Joel shoots it in the head. Now, here's a scene where you see a close-up of one of their hands and these little fungal tendrils coming up and wrapping around their fingers as if that's something that fungus actually does, and it's like it moves at a perceivable rate. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there's an organism that's not sentient that can move in such a way, that actually is able to move at a pace that is perceivable to the eye. But here, there's this fungal tendril just wrapping up around this guy's finger, and there they go. It's sending out messages to all the other infected in the area, and that is what ends up killing Tess. That is what attacks them. And, yeah, I gotta say, I don't know why. This is a completely unnecessary change, and it seems to me like they are almost reducing the threat of other people on the characters in the show and increasing the threat of the infected. And while that isn't always a bad thing, why you can't have Tess in a last stand with, say, like Fedra or some raiders or something, as opposed to just a horde of zombies, is beyond me. That seems, yet again, an unnecessary change. And then we come to the most laughable scene of the entire episode, in which Tess makes out with an infected. Now, I know how ridiculous that seems. How could they film such a ridiculous scene? How does that make sense? And I gotta tell you, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. If you watch this, you're going to be sitting there on your couch or whenever you're watching this on and just So basically what happens is this. They find out that Tess is infected. She shows them the neck, just like in the show, or in the video game. And the dead are coming, obviously. So she dumps over a bunch of fuel and she throws grenades on the floor. She's like, you need to get out of here. I'm going to make sure that they don't follow you, yada, yada, yada. And the infected come flooding in, and she's trying to light this Zippo lighter, and it won't light. And she's standing there, and all of these infected are running past her, except for one stops and starts staring at her and just starts inching up close. And you can see the little fungal tendrils coming out of its mouth, and it gets right up to her and like basically starts making out with her, more or less, and she just lets it happen while she's trying to light this Zippo. Now eventually she obviously drops the Zippo, the whole thing explodes and goes up in flames, and all the infected are dead. But the fact that I don't really understand why this is a change that they felt that they needed to make. I think I know where they were going with it. So the creators of the show, I forget his name. I'm gonna have to look it up. Craig Mazin, or if that's how you say his name, basically comes out and says at the end that, or he says that the only reason that they are violent is because people resist. So people are the bad guys. The only reason that the infected are violent is because people resist and are violent at them first. And so for the fact that Tess is not hostile towards them and acting aggressively allows this infected to make a slow approach and begin to make out with her, and then she just kind of lets it happen. And I assume that that is to spread the fungal infection, and maybe that's the most effective method of spreading it outside of biting. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I think I know what they were going for, but that's dumb. It's just dumb. It's dumb. And that's probably one of the dumbest things I've seen in a TV adaptation so far. And I've seen a lot of bad adaptations. And that is pretty much where the episode ends. Now again, 7.75. Most of that episode was decent. However, that last bit there, if they had just done what they did in the game, Tess makes her last stand against the feds, then it would have been probably an 8, maybe 8.5 on my scale. And maybe I'm being too generous with my ratings. I don't know. Because I tend to think that 5 is poor when it's really just average. But that's one of the dumbest things that I've seen in a while. Now, I will give them credit because I had heard that Tess was going to be in 5 episodes. And I was talking to a buddy of mine about it, and I said, if I were to create this show, and if I were to write this show, she'd be dead by the end of episode 2. So I am happy that they decided to do that. I think where they ended off on this episode was a good place to end. And the fact that they're not drawing out that first section of the game is a good thing. I'm really glad that I was wrong about that. Now, we'll see about next week, which for me, as I'm recording this video, is tonight. So, I don't know, because this one we're going to have like a fucking origin episode for Bill and Frank, which... Why is that something that we need? Yet again, all these origin episodes and all these damn shows really just, it takes you out of the whole story. And it adds nothing, in my opinion. It adds absolutely nothing. Because by the end of episode probably 4, Bill should be out of the picture. I'd probably say probably close to the beginning of episode 4. If I were writing it, Bill would be out of the picture. That whole sequence should take an episode, maybe an episode and a half. So we'll see where they go with that, but they're just bloating it with origin stories. And characters who were not in the game alive. Frank was yeah, Frank was dead in the game. So they're making him alive now. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, that's my review for episode 2 of season 1 of HBO's The Last of Us. If you enjoyed that, please hit the like button, subscribe, comment down below, let me know what you think. And once again, don't forget to pick up something heavy. Peace.